I'm here at the Boardman Performance Centre in Evesham in the UK, and in this place you can undergo physiological testing, physiotherapy, biomechanical sessions, even hone your position in the wind tunnel. But I'm here for something oh so special too, and that is to check out 3 of the world's fastest bikes that have ever been used. Now you may well think you've already seen this bike on the GCN Tech channel, but no, you have not. Quite recently I did a feature on the Lotus 110, which is the road-going version of this bike if you like. This one though is designed for track and speed purely. This bike quite literally gives me goosebumps. Now, it is an original design concept of a guy called Mike Burrows, who originally designed something quite similar to it back in 1985, and it was called the Wind Cheater. However, due to the UCI's regulations and rules, bikes like that weren't allowed in competition. So it meant that Burrows essentially shelved that project in 1987, probably due to the frustration caused by those rules. And well, he continued his passion of developing recumbent bicycles. How then did Lotus end up in this project? Well, going on hearsay, back in the summer of 1991, a Lotus test driver and also Formula 2 driver, Rudy Truman, who was a keen cyclist, bumped into Mike Burrows in John Borwell Cycles in Norwich, which happens to be where Lotus is based. Now, they got chatting away, both of them keen cyclists, and Burrows started to tell Truman all about the Wind Cheater prototype that he had. And of course, Truman showed pretty keen interest in this, went back to Burrows' workshop, borrowed that prototype and took it into work in Hethel, which is where Lotus is based. Now, with this bike up against the desk of Rudy Truman in those Lotus offices, the project engineering director, the late Roger Becker, he came along, looked at it and said, "That is great. We've got to build it." Now that makes him an absolute legend in my eyes and opinion, and if it doesn't in your eyes, this will certainly make him a legend. He drove the Lotus Obree in the James Bond film The Spy Who Loved Me, which also featured another hero of mine, a Mr. Roger Moore, Sir Roger Moore, no less. Now, it wasn't all plain sailing though, because Roger Becker had to then go off and convince the rest of the Lotus board to run with this project. Probably not the easiest thing to do at the time, because Lotus wasn't in the most financially stable place. Sales of the M100 Elan car were suffering because they weren't reaching the anticipated forecast. However, Becker, he must have been a good salesman. He must have pitched it absolutely brilliantly, because when the board came to vote, this got the go-ahead by 1 vote. Now, when Roger Becker broke the news of this being allowed by the Lotus board, I can imagine he was super excited for 2 reasons. Well, this project was given the green tick, plus the fact that the UCI had also kind of relaxed its stringent rules around frame design, which was fantastic because back then track cycling wasn't as popular as what it is now. These days, track cyclists are almost household names across the world. But I don't reckon the UCI expected something like this to land through the post as a frame design. But Truman, you've got to give your hat off to him, right? The guy, he managed to convince them that this would increase the popularity of track cycling. And for this man here, as a 12-year-old, it changed my life. Rudy, he was paired up with a guy called Richard Hill, who was a Lotus aerodynamics expert, and for good reason, because that Wind Cheater prototype apparently wasn't the lightest of bikes, wasn't the stiffest, and also, surprisingly, wasn't that good in the wind tunnel. So plenty of refinements happened, and it was an action-packed 6 months. Early mornings, late evenings, weekends, you name it, they worked around the clock to get this bike developed, and it finished at the Barcelona Olympics in July of 1992. Right, let's check out the bike then, and you can see it catches the wind because obviously it is designed for velodrome use, but it's got an asymmetric style frame design on that monocoque frame, meaning, get this, the wheels are just attached on one side. It's like a cantilever type mounting, which is so futuristic. If we think now we've got Cannondale and their lefty fork and everything, but if I look at the rear wheel where that's fitted in, it's just an amazing feat of engineering, as is the front fork too. I'm going to stick with those front forks because this is so cool. These days, time trial riders are getting higher, you know, they're not getting so extreme, but Boardman, he managed to get himself into such a good position. Check out where those handlebars actually come from. That's right, they don't come from the top of the fork steerer or anything like that. They're actually coming straight out of the fork crown. That is so low. Now the handlebars, they have got such a cool profile to them. Hardly any height at all, but a real aerodynamic depth in there, so the wind's just going to flow over it. And check out the bulbous ends, if you like, where Boardman started his efforts from. I think these are probably actually my favourite part of the whole bike, the actual way in which the bars have been moulded into the forks, and then these aluminium risers here that the extensions go on top of. And I reckon that this could well be a bit of titanium here that the elbow rests are made from. And then a little nod to the Lotus 25 interior, I'm led to believe, is the red elbow pads made out of leather here, which Boardman's forearms gently pressed on. If we check out this saddle to bar drop, that is so extreme, especially compared to modern day positions. And one of the reasons how Boardman managed to actually get into this position, now I have this weird memory of a child either seeing a documentary or reading about it in a magazine, that Boardman worked with a team who actually gaffer taped his hands into position and gradually lowered him to get into a super aggressive aerodynamic position. These days, however, riders are much higher because then they close up the frontal area, but we didn't know those things back then. But it worked for Boardman, that was the important thing about it. Let's look though at some of the extra details on this bike. I would love to actually have brought my toolkit with me and take it all apart so I could show you everything, but I don't want to ever mess with a bit of history like this. Besides, some of the fittings on it are pretty special. I don't think I've got tools to remove, for instance, this headset top cap cover. But the wheels, as we've already said, are held in place on just one side, and then they've got these pretty cool finishing touches on the axle ends, including on the rear there. That Lotus badge reminds me of the head badge on the vehicles that we see these days, bombing up and down motorways. And the tyres fitted to these wheels, these are Continental Olympic Bs. They are super light, they were super expensive even back in 1992. I remember flicking through the pages of magazines with my jaw almost on the floor at the cost of them. So they got a silk carcass to them, super light, super fast, pumped up to probably 200 PSI. That wouldn't have been the most comfortable ride, let's face it. The wheels though, yeah, that's right. Loads of you will be thinking, why on earth didn't he use a disc wheel on the front as well as on the rear? Well, in Barcelona, the velodrome was outdoors, meaning a gust of wind could well have sent Boardman off of his line down there on the black line on the track, and he could have lost a few seconds, possibly over the 4-kilometre distance. However, in training, he did in fact use a front disc wheel and broke the world record then by 4 seconds. Other finishing touches include titanium inserts where necessary or required. So for instance, the headset cups, they're titanium, the bottom bracket shell, that's titanium too, and I bet a pretty penny that also the fork inserts are also. Now, with all of this aside, there is a finishing detail on the bike that I was always curious about. Why the Union Jack, or the Union flag actually, as we should call it? Originally I thought, well, it's because Boardman was representing Great Britain at the Olympics, but in actual fact, the bike itself was really plain and, well, some would say a little bit boring. So they decided to pop down to a local auto factor shop, so a little car shop, and they bought themselves a Union flag, stuck it on just to liven it up a bit. Later transpired it was a little nod to the Lotus 79 Formula 1 car. I love finishing touches like that. So my first memory of this bike wasn't actually the Barcelona Olympics. It was in May of 1992 and the front cover of a British magazine, Cycling Weekly. Now the guy riding on one of these bikes was a gentleman called Steele, who I've actually had the pleasure of racing against, although he did put me away by quite some margin. Now he used this bike at an international track meeting at the Saffron Lane Velodrome in Leicester, which is sadly no longer around. Steele, he used the bike and he set a personal best by 2 seconds over 4 kilometres. A good achievement, but not enough to raise suspicion because it didn't necessarily show off just how quick this bike could go. And I'm sure, Brian, you don't mind me saying that, mate. However, all the other nations were pretty interested because they hadn't seen this used in competition, and the UCI equipment delegate who was there, this was also the first time he'd seen it. But well, they just simply nodded and went, use that in the Olympics if you want. But the run-up to the Olympic Games, just 2 months away, wasn't necessarily that straightforward. During this time, Britain had what can only be described as a heat wave. I guess the weather was over 20 degrees. But I'm joking, the heat wave was pretty strong, and it meant that the resin being used to cure the carbon fibre wasn't able to cure quick enough. And I mentioned as well earlier on about the number of early mornings and late evenings there were, and there are two unsung heroes in the tale of this bike being built, Les Holt and Mark Hulsey. Now they actually started work at 3 AM so that they could work on the carbon fibre. And they were the only guys who could actually work on it because Lotus, remember, didn't have any experience in carbon fibre at that time. So a big hats off to those two gentlemen. So the Barcelona Olympics in 1992, that was when the world caught sight of this bike. It was on television sets all over the world. Boardman sat on it. He broke the world record twice, the Olympic record twice, and just as importantly, made me fall in love with track cycling. Oh, and get this project was so secret, virtually nobody else in the Lotus factory knew that they were even building a bike. Now I've got heaps more geeky stats that I've dug out and researched, along with help of real lovers of the Lotus Sport projects, so that will be in the description below. But now I'm going to show you another bike that you need to know all about. Another bike now, but from the same era as that Lotus 108. Vastly different in terms of design, shape, and probably aerodynamics too. But what do I know? Now, Corima, Cooperation Riffard-Martin, was set up by Jean-Marie Riffard and Pierre Martin in 1973, and they focused on composites in the aeronautical or aerospace industry as well as the automobile industry too. Fast forward though to 1988, and they started to make a disc wheel for bicycles, and then came the 4 spokes, and in 1991 this came along. So the Corima Cougar, or also known sometimes as the Corima Contro. These bikes actually were really popular with track sprinters for quite some time. The reason being they could be totally customised to a rider's specification, which played straight into the hands of someone like Boardman, who had the ability and flexibility to get low and long for a long period of time, up to an hour say. And this was used just for that. In 1993, this bike was used at the Velodrome du Lac in Bordeaux for Boardman's hour record attempt just 1 year after he got Olympic gold in Barcelona. Now apparently there was a bit of a falling out between Chris and Lotus after the Barcelona Olympics because of the bike he was using and what he was contracted to ride during his amateur racing. But all of that aside, Harry Middleton was an instrumental part in Chris going for the hour record and using this bike. Now Harry Middleton, he was Chris's manager and agent and actually set up the team that Chris was riding for in the season of 1993, North Wirral Velo Kodak. Now, interestingly here too, is that squad were actually using Cougar bikes, although that Cougar was no link at all to the Corima brand. As a side note, those Cougar bikes were actually built by legendary frame builder Terry Dolan. But Corima wanted to be involved somehow in the Tour de France, what with them being a French brand. So this played into their hands, an advantage, I guess, if you like, because the hour record attempt coincided with stage 18 of that year's Tour de France that finished in Bordeaux and was actually won by Djmolodine Abdou-Japarov, aka the Tashkent Terror, and importantly meant that the media were in town and they could truly give the hour record the attention it deserves. Right, the bike then that attempted that world hour record back in 1993. As you can see, the frame, totally different. I've put my hand through there, nothing like that 108 frame. Remember, they could be totally customised. So we've got here the actual head tube into down tube join is much different from the standard model that was offered. So it's a really elongated flat bit here. And also the seat post, traditionally, it was a normal seat post that went inside of there. Now I reckon there is a normal one inside of it, but it's really well integrated because they've built up the seat masts from the frame. If we move forward to the handlebars and forks, again integrated, so it takes very similar design ideas from those of the Lotus, but They are a lot more chunky, I think, is the easiest way to describe it. They're not quite as thin, so there's a little bit more depth to them there. And the actual bar ends, they tend to go a little bit backwards rather than forwards. They're kind of flipped around. But the elbow cups and the tri-bar extensions, they use something pretty similar too. But we're beginning to see a lot more carbon fibre being used here in the handlebars, for instance. But the tri-bar extensions, or skis as we sometimes like to call them, have actually been moulded for Boardman's fingers so that when he's laying down the power, he can really grip on there nice and firmly. I love attention to detail like this. We've got no Lotus 25 leather interior here though, but we have got some foam padding for the elbows during that hour record. Now, something which really struck me, even as a youngster, when I saw Boardman go for this hour record, is the fact that he used 4-spoke wheels. When Corrimer produced a disc wheel, and I'm pretty sure even made a front disc wheel at that time too. Velodrome du Lac in Bordeaux is an indoor velodrome, so wind wasn't going to affect the attempt whatsoever. Now, presumably, they just wanted Boardman to showcase these wheels rather than the disc version. Now, when Boardman attacked that hour record, I cannot believe to imagine what was going on inside of his head, because just 7 days before, his arch rival Graham Obree had set a new world hour record of 51.596 kilometres. Boardman, though, he was incredibly strong mentally and beat it by 674 metres, and that set up a tug of war between these two riders for many years to come. And 3 years later, it went to this. Now, Boardman used on occasion during his time with GAN bikes badged up as Lotus, sometimes badged up as Eddy Merckx, and sometimes with no logos on whatsoever. Eddy Merckx bikes were sponsoring the GAN team, and obviously they wanted to maximise their sponsorship along the way. Lotus, I'm led to believe, were absolutely furious that this was happening, but I assume couldn't really do anything about it. After all, they had sold these bikes to the team. Now, there is a little bit of history here because Eddy Merckx did the same trick on Ernesto Colnago, who built the hour record bike that he used in Mexico of '68. So the Lotus 110, which is what the model number of this bike is a multi-purpose bike, meaning it can be used both on the road as well as on the track, due to the interchangeable dropouts on the rear, as well as the fact you can mount a brake here on the front and also the rear. However, the front has got a customised fork, which we will come on to, don't worry. And you've also got routing there too for the internal cables. I'm not going to go into the full development of this bike because some of you will remember a couple of months ago I did a full look at the Lotus 110 bike, but I have got another snippet here for you because I like to chuck those in, let's face it. So Lotus joined forces with a company called Aerodyne in South Africa. And well, they produced 263 of these bikes in South Africa and just 60 in the UK. There we are, my fact of the day. This bike, just like the Corrimer Cougar, was used by Boardman for an hour record attempt, and importantly, a successful one. September the 6th, 1996, Boardman, he set a distance of 56.375 kilometres in 1 hour, and that distance has never ever been beaten. It's incredible and outrageous, and the most outrageous thing about it is the fact it was done during the Superman era of positions. And when I say Superman, I mean Superman. Check out those handlebars. So I think the perfect starting place then has to be the handlebar extensions on this bike. Never before had we seen anything quite like it. Now, this was actually the brainchild, if you like, of Graham Obree, who, remember, was Boardman's arch rival. I don't think he was his enemy necessarily. In fact, I do recall Chris once lending Graham his helmet for an event, or maybe it was vice versa. Either way, they got on absolutely fine. But this position meant that you could really reduce the frontal area when it came to aerodynamics. Hence, how it could actually translate into such a big distance during that hour record attempt. Just look at how long they are. They're longer than the front wheel. So Boardman had a new set of forks with these integrated handlebars built for him for this hour record attempt. And I'm led to believe it was by a gentleman called Simon Ask, who was actually building frames at this time for a company called Hotter. And hotter, their frames had a kind of similar resemblance, I guess you could call it, to this style of bike. Now, the hour record had somewhat developed in the 3 years since that successful attempt in Bordeaux at the Velodrome du Lac. The attempt at the Manchester Velodrome in September of 1996 saw Boardman use a pair of Maverick wheels. So we've got the Comet disc wheel at the rear there, it's got the lenticular shape to it, and then we've got the 5-spoke IO wheel on the front. Now, these wheels are still being used in competition to this day. They have yet to be surpassed, it seems, in terms of aerodynamics when it comes to a multi-spoked wheel. So what with track bikes being so minimalistic, there's not generally many finishing touches on them. Generally, it's such a purist sport, if you like. I mean, obviously we've got the extremes of these handlebars, something that sadly the UCI banned and kind of reined back in the development of sport, I guess you could say. But we do have a chain set on this bike, which I've never ever seen before. I have no idea who made it. I have a bit of a hazy memory, I guess, that possibly Royce, who made titanium bottom brackets and other specialist bits of equipment down in the south of England, maybe they were involved in it. I'm not sure, again, who made the chainring. Could well be a company called MDT, and from memory, they were based in Cheltenham, which is not a million miles away from where we are today in Evesham in the UK. It's carbon fibre chainring, super cool, although it does have, obviously, the steel outer teeth there, and that's got 53 teeth paired up with a 15-tooth sprocket at the rear. And importantly for me, the pitch of that chain is 1/8 of an inch, something which is so special on a track bike. It's just the noise it makes. And the last little detail I just want to point out is this Selle San Marco saddle. Now, it's a no-slip system on there. Now, these were all the rage around the mid-90s. Essentially, the brand decided, why don't we embroider our logos all over it and tell everyone that you're not going to slip off the saddle because it's going to create a little bit of resistance in there. And well, it did, because it must have done. Boardman would have been able to stay in that position and not be pushed either backwards or forwards thanks to this. And you still see riders doing it to this day, putting things on their saddles so that it grips onto the Lycra just a tad so that they stay firmly seated. All right, I'm going, only joking. I've got to actually say a huge thanks to the folks at the Boardman Performance Centre. They have been absolutely wonderful today to let me come and check out these bikes. Also, a massive thanks to a gentleman called Paul Greasley. Without his help, the information regarding those Lotus bikes would be nowhere near as complete. So a huge thanks to you, Paul. Top man. Right, remember as well to like and share this video with your friends. And also, what video in terms of historical aspects of cycling would you like me to look into next? Because without Chris Boardman, to be honest, I wouldn't be here today. My passion for cycling would be nowhere near what it is. Remember to check out the GCN shop at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. We've got a whole heap of goodies for you to check out. And now for 2 more great videos, how about clicking or checking out the video on the Lotus 110 Superbike that Chris Boardman used? And well, for another absolute belter of a video, click just down here.